Sold your empty beach condo. We needed the cash. That was the text my brother sent me on a Tuesday morning. He assumed I would just roll over and accept a measly $15,000 for a property he thought was a rundown shack. What he did not know was that I do not just own that single penthouse. I own the entire luxury resort it sits on, and his little stunt was about to trigger a federal investigation. My name is Claire, and at 35 years old, I finally learned that the most dangerous predators do not hide in dark alleys. They sit across from you at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Before I dive into exactly how I systematically dismantled my toxic family's sense of entitlement, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you have ever had to build a fortress to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. The morning started like any other Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a black coffee and reviewing quarterly acquisition reports for my firm. The Florida sun was just beginning to warm the room when my phone buzzed against the marble countertop. I glanced at the screen expecting a message from my legal team. Instead, the name Bradley flashed across the display. Bradley is my 33-year-old brother, and seeing his name usually meant one of two things. He either needed a loan he would never repay, or he wanted me to do his taxes for free. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. Hey, needed cash for the new tech startup. Sold your shabby beach condo. Mom said you would not mind taking one for the team. Wiring you $15,000 from the sale. Do not make a big deal out of it. We are family. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. I did not cry. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not scream in anger. I just felt a cold, sharp, and absolute clarity settle over my mind. Bradley had spent his entire adult life bouncing from one doomed crypto venture to the next, always funded by the bank of mom and dad. Now he had apparently decided to fund his latest illusion with my personal assets. I opened my banking application. Sure enough, a pending wire transfer for exactly $15,000 sat in my checking account. He actually thought $15,000 was a fair cut. He actually thought I would just sigh, accept the money, and let him steal a piece of real estate from under my nose. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for the garage. I did not bother replying to his message. There is absolutely no point in arguing with a narcissist over text messages. They twist your words, play the victim, and forward screenshots to your mother to prove how unreasonable you are being. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and merged onto the highway heading toward Miami. As the palm trees and strip malls blurred past my window, I pressed a button on my steering wheel to dial my executive assistant, David. The phone rang exactly twice before he answered. Good morning, Claire. Are we looking at the Miami portfolio today? David asked, his voice crisp and professional over the car speakers. David, I need you to pull up the corporate trust documents for the Azure property, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady while I navigated through the morning traffic. And contact the corporate legal team. Have them on standby. We might have a massive fraud case on our hands. There was a brief, stunned pause on the other end of the line. Is everything all right, Madam Chairman? He asked, dropping the casual tone immediately. My brother just informed me that he sold my penthouse, I replied, changing lanes smoothly. I could practically hear David choking on his morning coffee. The penthouse. The one at the very top of the resort you bought out of bankruptcy last year. The one held under the shadow LLC. Yes, that exact one, I said. I will be on site in 20 minutes. Have the resort security team aware of my arrival, but tell them to stand down completely until I give the word. I want to see exactly what is happening before we show our hand. Understood. I will have the documents ready and the lawyers waiting for your signal, David replied before ending the call. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, feeling the powerful engine surge forward. My family had always viewed me with a mixture of pity and mild annoyance. To them, I was just Claire, the boring, struggling freelance bookkeeper who spent way too much time behind a computer screen and never wore designer labels. I intentionally let them believe that narrative. I let them think I barely scraped by doing basic tax returns for local bakeries and landscaping companies. It was the absolute perfect camouflage. In reality, my small bookkeeping business had evolved years ago into a ruthless, highly successful private equity firm specializing in acquiring distressed hospitality assets. I bought failing hotels, gutted their toxic management structures, rebuilt them from the ground up, and turned them into massive gold mines. The Azure was my absolute crown jewel. It was a sprawling, ultra-luxury beachfront complex in Miami that I had acquired during a massive bankruptcy liquidation. But my family knew none of this. To keep them off my back, I had told them I inherited a tiny, outdated timeshare condo from a former client who passed away. That was the shabby beach condo Bradley thought he had just sold. Growing up, Bradley was the undisputed golden child of our household. Whatever Bradley wanted, Bradley got. If he wrecked a car, my parents blamed the other driver. If he failed a college class, they claimed the professor was intimidated by his genius. When I started working 3 jobs to put myself through night school, my parents told me that hard work builds character for people who lack natural talent. When Bradley dropped out of his second semester to become a luxury lifestyle influencer, they bought him a brand new camera setup and paid his expensive city rent for 2 entire years. And then there was his wife, Jasmine. Jasmine was an aspiring social media influencer who treated me like something she had scraped off the bottom of her expensive shoes. She was perfectly matched with Bradley, fueling his delusions of grandeur while actively looking down on my supposed freelance bookkeeping career. Jasmine firmly believed that anyone who did not wear flashy brand names was inherently worthless. They were a match made in toxic heaven, and I knew without a doubt that Jasmine was right there beside him celebrating this massive theft. My parents constantly reminded me that as a single woman, my financial needs were secondary to Bradley's legacy. He was the man of the house, the grand entrepreneur, the visionary who was just one deal away from making millions. I was just the quiet, ungrateful sister who needed to be a supportive team player. And now this great visionary had somehow managed to forge my signature bypass what he thought were basic legal safeguards and sell a property to get quick cash. He thought he was selling a basic outdated unit. He had absolutely no idea that the individual deed he forged did not even legally exist anymore. When I bought the complex, all individual deeds were dissolved into a single corporate trust. He had just sold a piece of paper that meant nothing, and he had likely committed federal wire fraud in the process. I pulled up to the heavily guarded gated entrance of the Azure. The complex towered over the Miami coastline, a sleek, breathtaking masterpiece of glass and steel reflecting the bright morning sun. The valet rushed forward to open my door, recognizing me immediately, despite my casual jeans and plain blouse. "Welcome back, Miss Claire," he said warmly, standing up perfectly straight. I handed him the keys and walked straight through the grand lobby. The imported marble floors gleamed brilliantly under the massive crystal chandeliers. I completely bypassed the front reception desk and walked directly to the private biometric access elevator, reserved exclusively for the owner and high-level executives. I pressed my thumb against the glowing green scanner. The heavy steel doors slid open silently, and I stepped inside, hitting the single button for the penthouse level. The ride up was agonizingly slow. My mind raced through the severe legal implications of what Bradley had just done. Wire fraud, forgery, grand theft. He had finally crossed a line that our parents could not simply sweep under the rug with a forced apology and a tense family dinner. He had played a very stupid game, and he was about to win a catastrophic prize. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor. The doors opened directly into the private, expansive foyer of my home. I stepped out onto the plush carpet and immediately froze in my tracks. The heavy mahogany double doors leading into the main living area were propped wide open, and echoing down the hallway, vibrating against the expensive artwork hanging on the walls, was the unmistakable sound of loud, obnoxious bass music. Someone was inside my sanctuary, making themselves completely at home. I took a deep, steadying breath. adjusted the leather strap of my purse on my shoulder, and walked straight toward the noise. I did not feel fear. I did not feel sadness. I only felt an overwhelming readiness to burn my brother's entire fabricated world straight to the ground. I stepped through the heavy mahogany doors into the sprawling main living area of my penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean, but my attention was immediately drawn to the absolute chaos unfolding in the center of the room. My sanctuary had been invaded. Bradley was standing near my custom velvet sofa, holding a heavy-duty black trash bag. He was carelessly sweeping my carefully curated art books and personal items off the coffee table and tossing them straight into the plastic. My imported silk cushions were piled haphazardly on the floor like discarded rags. And there, lounging on one of the bar stools by the granite kitchen island, was his wife, Jasmine. She was dressed in a pristine white designer jumpsuit, holding her phone high in the air to record the ocean view for her social media followers. In her other hand, she casually held one of my Waterford crystal flutes. I recognized the distinct green and gold foil on the bottle sitting next to her. It was a vintage reserve champagne I had been saving for years to celebrate my next major corporate acquisition. She was drinking it like it was cheap Prosecco at a bottomless brunch. Jasmine lowered her phone when she noticed me standing in the hallway. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look guilty. Instead, she offered a perfectly manicured, condescending wave. "Well, look who decided to show up early," she drawled, taking another slow sip of my expensive champagne. "Do not stand there looking so dramatic, Claire. We are doing you a massive favor." I walked further into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. My eyes locked onto the black trash bag in Bradley's hand. "Put that bag down," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Bradley looked up from the coffee table completely unfazed. He actually chuckled, tossing a framed photograph of my college graduation into the garbage. "Relax, Claire. I texted you. We are handling the heavy lifting, so you do not have to stress about it. The buyer wants the place completely empty by noon, so you should probably start packing your bedroom right now. We already cleared out the guest bathroom and boxed up your cheap toiletries." Jasmine set her crystal glass down on the granite island with a sharp clink. "Honestly, Claire, you should be thanking us. It is completely ridiculous for you to be hoarding a massive penthouse like this anyway. Your little freelance bookkeeping gig clearly does not pay enough to justify living in a place with this kind of ridiculous overhead. You sit at a computer all day doing basic taxes for local diners and plumbers. You do not need a beachfront view for that. You just need a desk and an internet connection." I crossed my arms, refusing to give them the hysterical reaction they were desperately hoping for. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw a tantrum. Jasmine thrived on manufactured drama for her online audience, and Bradley used emotional outbursts to paint me as the unstable, jealous sister. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. Jasmine took my silence as a sign of submission. She smoothed down the front of her jumpsuit and smiled that fake camera-ready smile she used to manipulate people. "Bradley has a real business to run, Claire. His new tech company is going to completely revolutionize the digital marketplace. He is a true entrepreneur. We need the liquidity right now to secure server space and hire a massive marketing team. You taking one for the team and giving up this old place is exactly what a supportive family member should do. My followers are going to love the story of how we sacrificed everything to build this tech empire from the ground up." "Supportive family member," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the silent room. "You broke into my home. You are drinking a bottle of champagne that costs more than your monthly car lease. And you are throwing my personal belongings into garbage bags like trash. Which part of this exactly represents a supportive family dynamic to you?" Bradley dropped the heavy trash bag onto the hardwood floor with a loud thud. He walked over to the kitchen island and stood next to his wife, puffing out his chest to assert his authority. "Oh, stop playing the victim, Claire. Mom and Dad already agreed that this was the best financial move for everyone." They know I need the capital to launch my app. They said you have always been incredibly selfish when it comes to sharing your things, so I had to take the initiative for the good of the family. I am wiring you 15 grand from the initial deposit. That is more than enough for you to put a down payment on a nice, sensible one-bedroom apartment inland. It is better suited for someone in your lower tax bracket anyway. I walked slowly toward the kitchen island, stopping just a few feet away from them. I looked at the trash bags on my floor, then at the empty champagne bottle, and finally at my brother's arrogant, smiling face. "Bradley," I said softly, "I want you to explain something to me very clearly. How exactly do you sell a property that you do not legally own? How do you transfer a deed that has my name on it to a random buyer without my physical presence or consent?" Bradley's smug smile only widened. He looked at Jasmine, who let out a soft, mocking laugh as if I had just asked the stupidest question in the world. Bradley reached into the inside pocket of his expensive but poorly fitted blazer. He pulled out a folded stack of thick legal paper and tossed it onto the granite countertop right next to the empty champagne bottle. He slid it toward me with the tip of his finger, tapping the top page victoriously. "You really think you are the only one who knows how to handle basic paperwork, Claire?" he asked, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "It is called a quitclaim deed. It legally transfers your ownership rights directly to me. Mom helped me locate the original property records you had stashed away. Once the property was officially transferred into my name, I was completely free to flip it to the buyer for pure cash." I looked down at the document resting on the granite. There, at the bottom of the final page, was my signature, or rather, a laughably sloppy imitation of my signature, stamped with a bright blue public notary seal. "You forged my signature," I stated, keeping my tone entirely flat and analytical. Bradley scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were overreacting to a minor parking ticket. "I had a buddy from my college fraternity notarize it. He did not ask any questions because he knows I am good for it." "Honestly, Claire, your signature was incredibly easy to fake. Just a few fast loops and a slanted letter C. Do not act like this is the crime of the century. The deal is already done. The paperwork is filed with the county. The buyer's money is currently moving into my business accounts. Who is going to stop me? You." I stared at the forged document resting on the granite island, then back at my brother's smug face. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen to dial 911. But before I could even press the first digit, the heavy steel doors of the private elevator chimed and slid open once again. I expected to see the building security team, or perhaps the building manager. Instead, my parents Brenda and Richard strolled casually into the foyer. They were laughing warmly about something my father had just said. My father was carrying 3 large brown paper bags from an upscale, ridiculously expensive seafood restaurant downtown, and my mother was holding a chilled bottle of imported champagne by the neck. They did not look like parents walking into the middle of a felony crime scene. They looked exactly like people arriving at a victory party. My mother stepped into the living room, her expensive designer heels clicking against the marble. She stopped when she saw me standing there. The warm, joyful smile vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a tight, annoyed grimace. "Oh, you are already here," she sighed, waving her hand dismissively, as if I were an uninvited guest crashing their private event. "I told Bradley to give you until this afternoon to process the news before we all sat down to talk. But since you are here, please do not ruin the mood, Claire. We are celebrating today." "Celebrating?" I echoed, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are celebrating the fact that your son just forged my signature and sold my home." My father walked past me without making eye contact. He set the heavy bags of seafood on the kitchen island right next to the forged quitclaim deed. Jasmine immediately started unpacking the boxes, completely ignoring the tension in the room. My father sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "Stop using such dramatic words, Claire," my father said, loosening his silk tie. "Nobody forged anything. It is not forgery when it involves family assets. We are just reallocating resources to where they are actually needed. Your brother is making moves. He is being proactive." I looked back and forth between the four of them. They were completely united in this delusion. They had actually convinced themselves that stealing a multimillion-dollar property was just a basic family financial decision. My mother walked over and placed her hands gently on Bradley's shoulders, looking at him with absolute pride. Family comes first, Claire. You know that has always been our motto. You are 35 years old and completely single. You have no husband. You have no children. You sit alone in this massive property, typing on a laptop all day, doing basic bookkeeping. What do you possibly need a luxury penthouse for? I need it because I own it, I stated flatly. Because it belongs to me. Do not be so terribly selfish. My mother snapped, her tone sharpening into a vicious scold. Bradley is trying to build a legacy. He has a wife to support. He has a vision for a groundbreaking technology company that is going to change the world. He just needed a little seed capital to get off the ground, and you were sitting on this ridiculous gold mine doing absolutely nothing with it. We all agreed that this was the most logical step for the family. You taking one for the team and giving up this old place is exactly what a supportive sister should do. So you helped him do it? I asked, locking eyes with my mother. You gave him the original property documents. My mother lifted her chin defiantly. I did what I had to do as a mother to protect my son's future. You lock your home safe, but you always use your college graduation year as the passcode. It was incredibly simple to open it during Thanksgiving dinner while you were in the kitchen washing our dishes. I gave him the papers because I knew you would be stubborn and unreasonable about this. Sometimes people need to be forced to do the right thing for their family. My chest tightened, not from sadness, but from the sheer breathtaking audacity of the woman standing in front of me. She had actively robbed my safe while I was cooking a holiday meal for her. Jasmine chimed in from the kitchen island, her mouth full of expensive crab meat. Plus, Bradley is wiring you $15,000 from the sale. That is plenty of money for a down payment on a cute little one-bedroom apartment closer to the highway. It will be much closer to those local diners you do taxes for anyway. You should honestly be thanking him for handling all the complicated paperwork. I felt my heart rate slow down into a steady, cold rhythm. The emotional ties I had left to these people were snapping one by one, evaporating into the air. I looked down at my phone, unlocking the screen. I am not moving anywhere, I said smoothly. But Bradley is going to be moving into a federal holding cell. I am calling the police to report grand theft and wire fraud. Bradley's smug expression faltered for just a fraction of a second, but my father stepped forward, his face turning bright red with sudden rage. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face, closing the distance between us. If you dial that number, you are completely dead to this family. My father growled, his voice echoing loudly in the spacious room. Do you hear me, Claire? You will be disowned. You will never be welcome in our home again. We will cut you out forever, and you will die completely alone. I looked at his pointing finger, completely unbothered by the threat. Being cut out of this toxic circle was not a punishment. It was exactly what I was hoping for. Go ahead and disown me, I replied, staring directly into my father's eyes. It does not change the fact that your son committed a felony. You cannot reverse the sale anyway, my father sneered, dropping his hand and crossing his arms triumphantly. The buyer already wired a massive non-refundable cash advance to secure the deal this morning. The money is already in motion, Claire. In fact, Bradley already transferred a generous portion of that cash advance directly into your mother's and my joint banking account. I paused, raising an eyebrow. You took a cut of the stolen money. We considered it repayment for all the years we supported you, my mother said proudly, smoothing down her designer dress. We used that transfer this morning to put a massive down payment on that luxury pontoon boat I have been wanting for our retirement. The dealer is preparing it for delivery next week. So unless you want to see your brother go to prison and your parents lose their retirement dreams, I suggest you put your phone away, sit down and eat some crab legs. They had all profited from the crime. Every single one of them had taken a piece of the pie, fully believing I was too weak and too desperate for their conditional love to ever fight back. They thought they had trapped me in a corner. They thought the money was completely untraceable, safely tucked away in boats and tech startup accounts. What they did not know was that the deed they had stolen was completely worthless, and the man they had sold it to was not a gentle, forgiving buyer. I stood there watching my family feast on expensive crab legs bought with stolen money. The sheer audacity of my mother's Thanksgiving theft still hung in the air. While I had been in the kitchen carefully basting a turkey and trying to create a perfect holiday for them, she had been sneaking into my home office. She had actively cracked my safe using my college graduation year as the passcode and walked out with what she believed was the deed to my home. And she did not feel an ounce of guilt. She felt entirely justified. My father cracked another crab shell, the loud snap echoing in the tense room. He pointed the metal cracker at me. "I suggest you go to the bedroom and finish packing your clothes, Claire. We do not want you making a scene when the new owner arrives. It will just be embarrassing for everyone involved." I did not move toward the bedroom. I did not raise my voice. I walked over to the kitchen island, leaned my hands against the cool granite, and smiled a slow, cold smile. I am not packing anything, but I am curious. What exact time is this mysterious buyer coming up here to claim his prize? Bradley smirked, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer. He glanced down at his heavy gold watch, a flashy piece I knew for a fact he could not afford. He should be coming up the elevator right now. He is a very serious investor, Claire, not some small-time bookkeeper like you. He wanted to do one final walkthrough of the empty unit before the banks closed this afternoon to finalize the remaining balance of the wire transfer. So you really need to take your trash bags and exit through the service elevator. Jasmine laughed, sipping her water, since she had already finished my vintage champagne. "Do not worry, Claire. We will tell him you are the cleaning lady if he asks. It will save you the embarrassment of explaining why you are still lingering around property you do not own anymore." Their absolute confidence was intoxicating. They were so busy patting themselves on the back for their brilliant heist that they had completely blinded themselves to the reality of the situation. They thought they had outsmarted me. But in the corporate world of private equity, I dealt with ruthless billionaires, aggressive hedge fund managers, and cutthroat board members every single day. My family was playing checkers while I was moving chess pieces on a board they did not even know existed. "You sold it to a serious investor," I repeated, keeping my tone light and conversational. "And did this serious investor happen to use his own legal team to verify the status of the deed? Or did he just blindly trust the forged piece of paper you handed him?" Bradley rolled his eyes dramatically, clearly annoyed by my questions. "He verified everything he needed to verify. He ran a title check and saw your name on the original public records. That is why the quitclaim deed worked perfectly. He gets the penthouse for an absolute steal, and I get the liquid capital I need to launch my tech empire. It is called a win-win situation. You would understand that if you actually knew anything about high-level business." My mother sighed loudly, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "Stop trying to interrogate your brother, Claire. It is incredibly unattractive when you act this bitter. The deal is done. The money is in our accounts. You lost this round, but it is for the greater good of the family. Just accept it with some dignity and leave before you embarrass yourself further." I just looked at her. I realized in that exact moment that I had spent 35 years of my life trying to earn the love and respect of a woman who was fundamentally incapable of providing either. I had paid for her luxury vacations. I had covered my father's medical bills when his insurance fell short. I had stayed quiet and small so Bradley could shine bright, and their repayment was robbing me blind and telling me to be grateful for the scraps. Before I could respond, a heavy booming knock echoed through the massive penthouse. It was not a polite, hesitant tap. It was a loud, aggressive strike against the solid mahogany double doors, the kind of knock delivered by someone who firmly believed they already owned the place. The sound made my mother jump slightly, and Jasmine quickly reached up to fix her hair, wanting to look perfect for the wealthy investor. Bradley puffed out his chest and pointed a stern finger at me. "That is him. Not a single word from you, Claire. You stand in the corner and keep your mouth shut, or I swear I will have building security drag you out of here by your hair." Bradley turned his back to me and marched toward the foyer with the swagger of a man who thought he had just conquered the world. He grabbed the brass handle and pulled the heavy doors open wide. "Well, well, Bradley," a loud, gravelly voice boomed from the hallway. "I hope you have the place completely cleared out. Time is money, and I have a demolition crew ready to start ripping up these floors by tomorrow morning." I froze. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear, but from the sheer, unbelievable irony of the universe. I knew that voice. I knew that aggressive, grating tone. I had heard it screaming across mahogany boardroom tables. I had heard it threatening my corporate legal team over conference calls for the past 2 years. Bradley stepped aside, gesturing grandly into the living room. "Come on in. The place is all yours. We were just finishing taking out the trash." Heavy footsteps crossed the marble threshold. The man who walked into my living room was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored Italian suit that stretched slightly over his wide frame. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes darted around the penthouse with greedy, calculating hunger. It was Preston. Preston was one of the most notorious, sleazy real estate developers in all of South Florida. For the last 24 months, he had been trying to launch a hostile, aggressive takeover of the entire Azure property block. He wanted to knock the luxury complex down and build a massive tacky casino resort in its place. But to do that, he needed a majority vote from the homeowner association. And to get that majority, he had been trying desperately to buy up the individual units one by one. I had personally blocked every single one of his attempts through my private equity firm. I had driven him absolutely crazy by remaining an anonymous corporate entity that refused to sell. And now my idiot brother had just tried to sell him my personal penthouse. Preston walked past Bradley without even offering a handshake. He strolled directly into the main living area, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings and the panoramic ocean view. He stopped near the kitchen island, completely ignoring my parents, who were smiling at him like starstruck fans. He finally turned his gaze toward me. He did not recognize me at first. In the corporate world, I always wore sharp designer suits, had my hair pulled back in a severe bun, and was surrounded by a wall of lawyers. Standing in my own living room in casual jeans and a loose blouse, I looked exactly like the helpless, displaced sister Bradley had likely described to him. "Is this the sister?" Preston asked, pointing a thick finger in my direction while looking back at Bradley. "You said she would be gone by noon. I do not want any emotional hysterics ruining the vibe of my new property. Tell her to grab her garbage bags and get out." My mother stepped forward quickly, offering Preston her most charming fake smile. "Oh, please forgive her. Claire is just having a little trouble letting go. She is a bit emotionally unstable, you see. But she is leaving right now. We are so thrilled to be doing business with a man of your stature." I did not move. I did not grab my bags. I stood perfectly still, looking Preston directly in the eyes. A slow, genuine smile finally spread across my face. "Hello, Preston," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I see you are still trying to buy your way into this building." Preston stopped. His thick eyebrows pulled together in deep confusion. He squinted at me, his arrogant expression faltering as his brain tried to place my face and my voice. The casual jeans and blouse were throwing him off, but the cold, authoritative tone was unmistakably familiar to him. "Do I know you?" he asked slowly, his voice dropping an octave. Bradley rushed forward, waving his hands defensively. "No, no, you do not know her. She is just a freelance accountant. She does not know anything about real estate. Claire, shut your mouth and walk out the back door right now before I call the police myself." I ignored my brother completely. I kept my eyes locked directly on Preston. I took a slow step forward, folding my arms across my chest. "Tell me, Preston," I asked smoothly, "did you really think you could bypass my corporate legal team by buying a single forged quitclaim deed from an unemployed crypto bro? Did you actually wire him money for a property that legally ceased to exist 12 months ago?" Preston's face drained of all color. He stared at me, the realization hitting him like a physical blow to the chest. The woman standing in front of him was not a struggling freelance bookkeeper. He knew exactly who I was, and he was about to realize exactly what he had just bought. Preston stood frozen in the middle of my living room. His expensive leather shoes seemed glued to the polished marble floor. The arrogant, booming developer who had just stormed into my home, demanding I pack my trash bags, was suddenly gone. In his place was a man rapidly realizing he had just walked directly into a massive financial landmine. His eyes darted from my casual clothes to my face, his brain desperately trying to reconcile the image of Bradley's supposedly unemployed, pathetic sister with the ruthless private equity chairman who had been legally suffocating his business for 2 entire years. "You!" Preston breathed out, his voice barely a hollow whisper. "You are the head of the holding group. You are the one who bought the Azure out of bankruptcy." Bradley let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, completely oblivious to the sheer terror radiating from Preston. Bradley clapped Preston hard on the shoulder. "What are you talking about, man? Claire does not own any holding groups. She is a freelance bookkeeper. She literally does taxes for local bakeries. She is just trying to confuse you because she is bitter that I outsmarted her. Do not let her play mind games with you." Preston did not even look at Bradley. He kept his wide, panicked eyes locked entirely on me. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The air in the penthouse felt electric, heavy with the impending collapse of my brother's massive ego. "I asked you a very simple question, Preston," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm and level. "How much money did you wire into my brother's offshore accounts this morning? I want to hear the exact dollar amount you paid for a forged piece of paper." Preston swallowed hard. Sweat began to bead along his forehead, ruining his slicked-back hair. 500,000, he muttered, his voice shaking. "I wired a flat $500,000 for the absolute title transfer. It was supposed to be a clean, direct sale. Your brother provided all the necessary documentation. He provided the original deed and the signed quitclaim transfer. $500,000. I let the number hang in the silent room. My parents had drained my grandfather's trust fund years ago to bail Bradley out of his first failed business, and now Bradley was selling my personal property for a fraction of its actual worth. The penthouse alone was valued at over $3 million. Preston thought he was getting the real estate steal of the century. Instead, he had just thrown $500,000 into a black hole of federal wire fraud. My father, Richard, stepped forward, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of misplaced pride. "Well, there you have it, Claire. $500,000 is a massive amount of money. It is life-changing capital for your brother's new tech venture. You should be incredibly proud that he managed to negotiate such a lucrative deal all on his own. You never could have sold this place for that much on your own." The sheer financial ignorance in my father's statement was almost physically painful to listen to. But before I could even address him, Bradley stepped directly into my personal space. He tried to use his height to physically intimidate me, glaring down with a vicious, aggressive sneer. "You heard the man," Claire Bradley spat, pointing a finger right in my face. "The money is transferred. The deal is completely finished. Preston has the legally binding deed right here in his hands. You cannot undo a notarized legal document just because you are throwing a jealous tantrum. Now I am officially ordering you to leave. Get out of Preston's property before I drag you out myself." Preston reached into his suit jacket with trembling fingers and pulled out the forged quitclaim deed. He unfolded it slowly, looking down at the paper as if it were a ticking bomb. He looked at the sloppy signature, then back up at me. My mother, Brenda, quickly rushed to Preston's side, gently touching his arm in a sickening display of fake charm. "Oh, Mr. Preston, please do not let my daughter upset you. She has always been prone to these ridiculous emotional outbursts when she does not get her way. She is just struggling to accept that her older brother is a successful entrepreneur. She will be gone in a few minutes. We will make sure she takes all her garbage bags down through the service elevator so she does not bother the other wealthy residents. Jasmine hopped off the bar stool, her expensive designer heels clicking sharply against the marble. She crossed her arms, glaring at me with absolute disgust. Honestly, Claire, this is getting pathetic even for you. You are actively trespassing on private property. You do not belong here anymore. If you do not turn around and walk out that door right this exact second, I am calling building security to have you forcibly removed. Jasmine pulled her phone out of her pocket, waving it in the air like a weapon. You are completely unhinged, Claire. You are having a mental breakdown in front of a serious investor. I am not going to let your insane jealousy ruin my husband's massive business deal. I will have the guards drag you through the lobby in handcuffs if I have to. They were all surrounding me, a united front of absolute toxicity. My father was glaring at me. My mother was apologizing for my existence. My brother was threatening physical violence. And his wife was threatening to have me arrested in my own home. They had spent my entire life pushing me into a corner, expecting me to fold, apologize, and make myself small for their convenience. But I was not that little girl anymore. I was not the scapegoat they could manipulate. I looked at Jasmine's phone, then up at her furious, entitled face. I turned my gaze to Bradley, who was still trying to look like the alpha male of the room. And finally, I looked at Preston, who was the only person in the room smart enough to realize that the ground beneath them had already collapsed. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, calculated smile of a predator that had finally trapped its prey. You know what, Jasmine, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive living room. You are absolutely right. Someone really should call building security. There are multiple hostile squatters currently trespassing in my home, and they are consuming my expensive vintage champagne without my permission. Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. You are completely delusional. I am calling them right now. No need. I interrupted, reaching into my purse and pulling out my own phone. I will save you the trouble. I bypassed the standard emergency numbers. I did not dial 911. I pressed a single programmed speed dial number on my screen. I put the phone to my ear, never breaking eye contact with my brother. Bradley scoffed loudly, crossing his arms. Oh, look at her pretending to call someone important. Who are you calling, Claire? Your imaginary lawyer. Are you calling the local diner to tell them you cannot finish their tax returns today? You are making a massive fool of yourself in front of a billionaire. The line connected on the first ring. Mateo went said into the phone, my voice dropping into the sharp, commanding tone I used in corporate boardrooms. I need you to bring the corporate legal team up to the top floor penthouse immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the building security team as well. We have a severe situation involving forged documents, trespassing, and massive federal wire fraud. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. Bradley threw his head back and laughed, a loud grating sound that filled the room. Wow, you really are crazy. You think calling some random guy named Mateo is going to scare us? What is he going to do? Are you friends with one of the janitors, Claire? Is he going to come up here with a mop and defend your honor? My mother shook her head, looking at me with absolute pity. This is just sad, Claire. You need serious psychiatric help. I am deeply embarrassed to call you my daughter right now. But Preston was not laughing. Preston was not shaking his head. Preston took a slow, deliberate step backward, distancing himself from my family, as if they were infected with a deadly disease. He looked down at the forged deed in his hand, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Bradley turned to Preston, still grinning widely. Do not worry about her, man. My sister just loves to create drama. The security guards will be up here in a minute to toss her out, and then we can finalize the rest of the paperwork for your new casino project. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form a single word, a loud, distinct sound echoed through the foyer. It was the soft electronic chime of the private VIP elevator. Bradley's smile instantly vanished. He spun around, staring down the hallway. He knew perfectly well that the VIP elevator was locked by strict biometric scanners. He had spent the entire morning complaining to Jasmine that he could not figure out how to access it, forcing them to use the standard resident elevators instead. It was impossible for anyone to bypass the security protocols without highest level clearance. Heavy, synchronized footsteps stepped off the elevator and onto the marble floor. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides. The game was officially over. My family had played their final card, and now I was going to show them the entire deck. 3 men stepped out of the private elevator. Leading the group was Matteo, the general manager of the resort. He was dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, his posture rigid and professional. Flanking him were 2 massive security guards in dark uniforms, their hands resting comfortably near their utility belts. Right behind them was David, my executive assistant, holding a thick leather briefcase. Bradley immediately puffed out his chest and marched toward them. He pointed an aggressive finger at Matteo. "Hey, who the hell are you people? You cannot just come up here. I am the new owner of this penthouse, and I did not authorize anyone to use that private elevator." Matteo did not even blink. He continued walking forward, his polished shoes silent against the marble floor. Bradley stepped into Matteo's path, his face turning red with indignation. "Did you hear me? I said I am the owner. I just finalized the sale with this gentleman right here. My crazy sister is trespassing and causing a massive scene. I want her escorted out of the building immediately. Use force if you have to. She is completely unhinged." Jasmine hurried over to stand next to Bradley, crossing her arms defensively. "You need to get her out of here right now. She has been harassing a billionaire investor and refusing to leave private property. If you do not remove her, my husband is going to sue this entire building for lack of security." Matteo stopped. He looked at Bradley and Jasmine with an expression of absolute polite indifference. He did not say a word to them. He did not acknowledge their threats. Instead, he smoothly stepped around Bradley, completely ignoring his existence. Matteo walked directly over to where I was standing. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, stood perfectly straight, and offered a deep, respectful bow. "Is there a problem?" Madam Chairman, Matteo asked, his voice echoing clearly through the dead silence of the room. "Security is fully locked down on the lower levels, and the corporate legal team is standing by for your instructions." The entire room seemed to stop breathing. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the distant crash of the ocean waves against the beach far below. Bradley stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his hand still pointing uselessly at the empty space where Matteo had just been standing. He blinked rapidly, looking back and forth between Matteo and me. "Madam Chairman," my mother repeated, letting out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. "What kind of ridiculous joke is this? Claire, who are these actors you hired? Are you honestly trying to stage some kind of fake corporate takeover to scare us? This is incredibly pathetic even for you." I did not look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked on Bradley. "They are not actors, Brenda," I said, finally using her first name instead of calling her mom. It was a conscious severing of the final thread between us. "This is Matteo. He manages the entire Azure Resort property, and the man behind him is David, the senior executive assistant for my private equity firm." Bradley shook his head aggressively, his face flushing with a mix of anger and sudden deep-seated panic. "Stop lying, Claire. You are a freelance bookkeeper. You do taxes for local diners. You do not have an executive assistant. You barely make $50,000 a year." I smiled a slow, predatory smile. "I let you believe that, Bradley. I let all of you believe that because it was the absolute perfect camouflage. Do you honestly think I would ever tell a family of emotional and financial vampires that I run a multi-million-dollar acquisition firm? The moment any of you found out I had real money, you would have drained me completely dry. You would have demanded loans for your fake tech companies. You would have demanded luxury boats for your retirement." My father stepped forward, his face pale. "Claire, what are you talking about?" I took a step toward the kitchen island, placing my hands flat on the cool granite. 3 years ago, I founded a private equity firm specializing in distressed hospitality assets. I buy failing luxury resorts, restructure them, and flip them for massive profits. Last year, the Azure went into bankruptcy. I did not just buy this single penthouse Bradley. I bought the entire building. I own the land it sits on. I own the management company that runs it. I own the parking garage downstairs. I turned my gaze to Preston, who was now sweating profusely, the forged deed trembling violently in his thick hand. And because I bought the property under a corporate trust, I continued, my voice echoing with absolute authority. All individual condo deeds were legally dissolved 12 months ago. The entire building is currently held by a single limited liability company. Preston looked down at the piece of paper in his hand. He looked at the sloppy signature, the bright blue notary stamp, and then up at Bradley. The arrogant developer looked like he was about to vomit directly onto my expensive marble floor. "The document you forged, Bradley," I said, pointing a sharp finger at my brother, "is not just a fake. It is a fake document for a legal entity that no longer exists anywhere on the public registry. You did not sell my penthouse. You sold a completely worthless, legally dead piece of paper." Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her designer phone slipped from her fingers and clattered loudly against the floor. Bradley swallowed hard. The absolute arrogance that had defined his entire life was rapidly draining from his eyes, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on the edge of a massive cliff. "But wait," Bradley stammered, his voice cracking. "The title search. Preston ran a title search. My name was not on it, but your name was. It said Claire owned it." David stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with a sharp click. "Because the transition of the deeds into the corporate trust is still pending final county publication," he stated coldly. "It takes 18 months for the public records to fully reflect the corporate dissolution." But the internal legal transfer was completed last November. "Madam Chairman holds absolute sole ownership. Your forged quitclaim deed has absolutely zero legal standing." Preston let out a sound that was halfway between a growl and a scream. He lunged forward, grabbing Bradley roughly by the lapels of his expensive blazer. "You little rat!" Preston roared, spittle flying from his lips. "You took my money. You took $500,000 of my corporate capital for a property you do not even own." Bradley shoved Preston back, panic completely taking over his features. "Hey, back off. I did not know. I thought she just owned the condo. I thought it was a simple flip. I will just give the money back. It is fine. Everything is fine." "It is not fine," Preston screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I already wired the funds to an offshore cryptocurrency account per your exact instructions. My bank cannot pull that money back. You stole $500,000 from me across state lines. That is federal wire fraud, you stupid kid." The words hit the room like a physical explosion. Federal wire fraud. My mother collapsed against the edge of the kitchen island, her hands gripping the granite to keep herself from falling to the floor. Her face was ashen, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the words to defend her golden child. But there was no defense. Not this time. Preston turned to me, his chest heaving. "Listen to me, Claire. I had absolutely no idea the deed was forged." He presented it as a legitimate family transfer. "I am a victim of fraud here." I looked at Preston with zero sympathy. "You are a shark who tried to buy stolen property for pennies on the dollar to fuel a hostile takeover, Preston. Do not play the victim with me. But you are right about one thing. You were defrauded. Which is why I strongly suggest you contact your own legal team." Jasmine backed away from Bradley as if he were suddenly on fire. Her eyes were wide, darting toward the private elevator. She had spent years riding the coattails of Bradley's fake wealth, and now that the illusion was shattering, her instinct for self-preservation kicked into overdrive. "I told him not to do it!" Jasmine shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the tense room. She pointed a manicured finger directly at her husband's chest. "I told him it was a terrible idea to forge your signature, Claire. I swear to God I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I did not sign any of the bank transfers. This was all Bradley and your mother." Bradley's jaw dropped. He stared at his wife completely betrayed. "Jasmine, what are you doing? We are in this together. We needed the money for the startup." "There is no startup," Bradley Jasmine screamed back, her perfect influencer facade completely dissolving into sheer panic. "There is just you losing money on stupid internet coins. I am not going to federal prison because you are a complete idiot. I am calling my own lawyer." The beautiful United Family front had completely collapsed in less than 5 minutes. They were turning on each other like starving animals in a cage. The loyalty they preached, the family first motto they used to manipulate me for 35 years, was absolutely meaningless when faced with actual consequences. Mateo stepped up beside me, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Madam Chairman, the local authorities are already waiting in the downstairs lobby. They arrived 3 minutes ago. Shall I send them up?" I looked at my brother, who was now trembling uncontrollably. I looked at my mother, who was sobbing into her hands, and I looked at my father, who was staring blankly at the wall, realizing his entire retirement was tied to a stolen cash advance. "Yes, Mateo," I said softly, feeling a profound, heavy sense of absolute closure wash over me. "Send them up. It is time to take out the trash." Mateo nodded sharply at my command. He raised his right hand to his earpiece and spoke a single quiet sentence. Less than 30 seconds later, the main resident elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open, and 4 uniformed Miami police officers stepped into the expansive foyer of the penthouse. Their hands were resting casually on their utility belts, their eyes scanning the room with professional, calculated precision. The moment my brother saw the badges, all the fight completely drained out of his body. His arrogant posture collapsed. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor until his back hit the granite kitchen island. He looked like a terrified little boy. "Bradley," one of the officers said, stepping forward with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs already in his hands. "We have received a sworn statement and digital evidence regarding a fraudulent real estate transaction and federal wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Bradley did not move. He was completely paralyzed by shock. The officer did not wait for a polite response. He grabbed Bradley's arm, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the granite countertop. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the silent living room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Jasmine did not hesitate. The woman who had sworn to love him for richer or poorer took one look at her husband being read his Miranda rights and made her final calculation. She grabbed her expensive designer purse from the bar stool. She did not look at Bradley. She did not offer him a single word of comfort. She marched straight toward the elevator, literally stepping over the black garbage bag that held my discarded art books. "Jasmine," Bradley cried out, his voice cracking as the officer patted him down. "Jasmine, call my lawyer. Call the tech investors. Tell them this is a massive mistake." Jasmine paused at the elevator doors. She turned her head, looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "There are no tech investors, Bradley. You are a complete fraud. And I am not spending the best years of my life visiting a federal penitentiary. Do not ever contact me again. I am calling my divorce attorney the second I get to the lobby." She stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut behind her, erasing her from our family forever. Preston was the next to abandon ship. The sleazy real estate developer shoved past my father, his face still bright red with sheer panic and rage. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at my parents. "I am going straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and after they are done with your son, my corporate lawyers are going to sue your entire family into absolute bankruptcy. You will not have a single dime left to your names when I am finished with you." Preston stormed out the front doors, taking the stairs, rather than waiting for the elevator to return. He was desperate to get as far away from the crime scene as humanly possible. And then it was just my parents. As the officers pulled Bradley away from the counter and started walking him toward the exit, my mother finally snapped out of her frozen trance. She let out a guttural, dramatic wail. She threw herself forward, completely ignoring the officers, and dropped to her knees directly in front of me. She grabbed the fabric of my jeans, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Claire, please," my mother sobbed, her voice echoing loudly against the vaulted ceilings. "You cannot do this. He is your brother. He is your own flesh and blood. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave him permission to sell the condo. If he goes to federal prison, his entire life is completely over. You are destroying our family." I looked down at the woman who had spent 35 years making me feel completely invisible. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness. Only a cold, clinical detachment. "I am not destroying anything, Brenda," I said, my voice steady and completely void of emotion. "Bradley destroyed his own life the second he decided to forge my signature. And you helped him do it. You robbed my safe on Thanksgiving." My father rushed forward, his face twisted in desperate anger. He stood over me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me one last time. "You owe us, Claire. You owe this family. We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. We paid for your college education so you could get your stupid little bookkeeping degree. You have a moral obligation to protect your brother." I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that made my father instinctively take a step back. "Hold on a moment, officers," I called out. The police stopped near the doorway, holding a sobbing Bradley between them. I walked slowly over to the massive smart television mounted on the living room wall. I pulled my phone from my purse, swiped the screen, and wirelessly cast a digital document directly onto the massive display. The screen flashed bright white, illuminating the room with an old scanned bank document. At the top of the page, in bold black letters, it read, "Theodore Irrevocable Trust Fund." My parents both froze. All the color instantly drained from my father's face. He recognized the document immediately. "You did not pay for my college education, Richard," I said, turning to face him. "I paid for my degree by working 3 miserable jobs and taking out massive student loans. But I did notice something very interesting when I finally gained access to my grandfather's estate records a few years ago. I noticed that the massive trust fund Grandpa Theodore specifically left for me had been completely drained when I was 22 years old." I swiped my phone screen again. The television displayed a transaction receipt. It showed a direct transfer of $250,000 from my trust account directly into a business account registered to Bradley. Right at the bottom of the page were the clear, notarized signatures of both my mother and my father, acting as the custodians of the account. "You stole my future to fund his very first failed business venture," I stated clearly, letting the words sink into their minds. "You robbed your own daughter to bail out your golden child." My father clenched his fists, his voice shaking with defensive rage. "You did not need that money, Claire. You were a girl. You were supposed to get married and have a husband take care of you. Bradley is a man. He needed a financial head start to build a legacy. It was family money, and we reallocated it to where it was needed most." I nodded slowly, absorbing his disgusting, misogynistic justification. "That theft happened over a decade ago. It is legally past the statute of limitations for criminal charges, which is exactly why I never brought it up. I knew I could not put you in jail for it, but I also knew I would eventually find a different way to balance the scales." I swiped my phone one final time. A new document appeared on the television screen. It was not an old bank record. It was a formal commercial loan agreement dated just 6 months ago from Liberty First Bank. "Bradley took out a massive commercial loan for his newest tech startup," I explained, walking slowly back toward the kitchen island. "He borrowed $800,000. And because his credit is absolute garbage, the bank required guarantors. Richard, Brenda, you two co-signed his massive loan. You put your beautiful, sprawling suburban home up as collateral to secure the funds." My mother stopped crying. She stared at the television screen, her mouth hanging open. "We make the monthly payments," she whispered defensively. "We have never missed a single payment." You did make the payments, I agreed. Until this morning. I turned my gaze to my father, locking eyes with him. When you play in the highest levels of private equity, Richard, you do not just buy buildings, you buy debt. 3 weeks ago, my firm acquired a massive portfolio of distressed commercial debt directly from Liberty First Bank. That portfolio included your specific loan. My father stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. He collapsed onto the cushions, his hands trembling violently. And because Bradley committed federal wire fraud today, I continued, my voice echoing like a judge handing down a final sentence. His business accounts are currently being frozen by the federal government. According to the strict terms of the contract, you signed any involvement in federal criminal activity triggers an automatic, non-negotiable default clause. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute power of the moment. As the sole owner of your debt, I am legally calling in the full balance immediately. You do not have $800,000 in liquid cash to pay me, so I am initiating formal foreclosure proceedings on your suburban home tomorrow morning. You have exactly until this Friday to pack your belongings and vacate the property. The silence that followed was absolute. The grand toxic illusion my family had built their entire lives upon had been completely shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. My mother did not scream. She did not beg. She simply stared blankly at the marble floor, realizing that her blind devotion to a worthless son had cost her absolutely everything. She had lost her money. She had lost her retirement boat. She had lost her home. "Take him away, officers," I said softly. The police dragged Bradley out the front door. He was weeping loudly, begging our mother to help him, but she did not even look up. The officers escorted my silent, broken parents out of the penthouse right behind him. They walked like ghosts, completely defeated by the reality of their own actions. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut. The penthouse was finally quiet. Mateo signaled to the two security guards. They quickly and quietly gathered the black trash bags my brother had filled respectfully, placing my items back onto the coffee table before stepping out of the room to give me privacy. David packed up his legal briefcase, offered a polite nod, and headed toward the private elevator. Mateo walked gracefully around the kitchen island. He picked up a fresh Waterford crystal flute from the cabinet. He grabbed a brand new unopened bottle of my favorite vintage reserve champagne from the wine fridge. With a soft, expert pop, he opened the bottle and poured the bubbling golden liquid into the glass. He walked over and handed it to me. "A very productive morning, Madam Chairman." Mateo said, a small, genuine smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you, Mateo," I replied, taking the cold glass. I walked slowly away from the kitchen, stepping out through the massive sliding glass doors onto the sprawling outdoor balcony. The warm Miami sun hit my face, and the salty ocean breeze whipped through my hair. I looked down at the pristine private beach below, watching the waves crash against the white sand. For 35 years, I had allowed myself to be the scapegoat of a family that valued compliance over character. I had hidden my success, dimmed my own light, and accepted their toxic abuse, because society tells us that family is everything. But standing on the balcony of my empire, I finally understood the truth. Family is not determined by blood, it is determined by respect. If you are watching this and you are currently shrinking yourself to make toxic family members comfortable, stop. You do not owe them your peace. You do not owe them your success. Build your empire in silence, set your boundaries in stone, and never apologize for protecting the life you built with your own 2 hands. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own future? Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is always massive, undeniable success. The soft electronic chime of the VIP elevator cut through the heavy tension in the living room. It was a sound none of my family members had ever heard before. Bradley had spent the entire morning complaining to Jasmine that he could not figure out how to unlock those specific doors. They required a biometric retinal and fingerprint scan that only I possessed. Yet here the doors were sliding open smoothly and silently revealing the true power dynamic of the room. Four men stepped out onto the polished marble foyer. Leading the group was Matteo, the general manager of the Azure. Matteo was a man of impeccable taste and absolute professionalism. Today, he was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit with a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. His posture was rigid, his expression completely unreadable. Flanking Matteo were two massive security guards. These were not your average minimum wage building monitors. These men were elite, highly trained private security professionals. They wore dark-fitted tactical suits. Their hands rested comfortably near their utility belts, and their eyes immediately scanned the room, assessing every single threat. Right behind Matteo stood Jonathan, the senior legal counsel for my private equity firm. Jonathan was a ruthless corporate attorney who carried a thick black leather briefcase that contained enough legal firepower to bankrupt a small country. He adjusted his glasses, his sharp gaze locking immediately onto Preston. The sheer physical presence of the four men changed the gravity of the room instantly. But my brother, blinded by his own towering ego and his desperate need to be the alpha male, completely misread the situation. He assumed these men had come up here to serve him. He actually believed that his newly forged status as the owner of a single condo meant that the entire resort staff was now at his personal beck and call. Bradley let out a loud, victorious laugh. He clapped his hands together and marched straight toward the foyer, puffing out his chest to make himself look bigger. He adjusted the lapels of his cheap, poorly fitted blazer and pointed an aggressive finger at Matteo. "Well, it is about time you guys showed up," Bradley barked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am Bradley. I am the man who just finalized the sale of this penthouse. I am assuming you are the building manager. I did not authorize anyone to use my private elevator, but since you are already here, you can make yourselves useful." Matteo did not stop walking. He did not blink. He kept his eyes focused straight ahead, moving with a calm, deliberate grace. Bradley stepped directly into Matteo's path, trying to physically block him from entering the living room. "Did you hear me speaking to you?" Bradley snapped, his face flushing with anger at being ignored. "I said I am the owner. This is my property. And this crazy woman right here is trespassing." Bradley aggressively pointed his finger across the room directly at me. "That is my sister, Claire." Bradley continued, raising his voice, so the billionaire developer behind him could hear how commanding he was. "She is completely unhinged. She is throwing a massive jealous tantrum because I sold the place and she is refusing to leave. I want her and her garbage bags escorted out of my building immediately. Use physical force if you have to. I do not care. Just get her out of my sight." Jasmine hurried over to stand next to her husband. She crossed her arms defensively, glaring at the security guards. "You need to remove her right now," Jasmine demanded, using her shrill, demanding influencer voice. "She has been harassing a very important billionaire investor and refusing to leave private property. If you do not drag her out of here this exact second, my husband is going to sue this entire building management company for lack of proper security. Make sure you take her down through the service elevator. I do not want her dirtying up the main lobby." My mother, Brenda, quickly rushed forward as well, putting on her best fake smile. She clasped her hands together, playing the role of the embarrassed, apologetic matriarch. "Oh, please forgive the disturbance, gentlemen. My daughter Claire is just having a little trouble letting go. She is a bit emotionally unstable, you see. She is just a freelance bookkeeper, so being in a luxurious place like this has made her a little delusional. We are so sorry you had to come all the way up here for this petty family drama." I stood perfectly still near the granite kitchen island. I did not say a word. I did not need to. I just watched them dig their graves deeper and deeper with every single word they spoke. They were so incredibly confident in their lies. They had spent my entire life talking over me, silencing me, and telling me my reality did not matter. Now they were trying to do it in front of my own employees. Preston, the sleazy real estate developer, was the only one who realized something was terribly wrong. He had not moved a muscle since the elevator doors opened. His eyes were locked on Jonathan, the corporate lawyer. Preston knew Jonathan. They had crossed paths in ruthless corporate negotiations before. Preston knew that a senior partner from a top-tier private equity law firm did not show up to a random condo dispute just to escort a crying sister out of the building. Preston's breathing became shallow, and the forged quitclaim deed in his hand began to tremble. Bradley, oblivious to Preston's panic, stepped closer to Mateo and snapped his fingers right in the manager's face. "Hello. Earth to management. Are you deaf? I gave you a direct order. Grab her by the arms and throw her out." The two massive security guards instantly stepped forward, completely closing the distance between themselves and my brother. They did not draw weapons, but their sheer size and intimidating presence forced Bradley to stumble backward. His arrogant posture cracked. He raised his hands defensively, his eyes widening in sudden fear. Mateo did not even acknowledge Bradley's existence. He treated my brother like a mildly annoying stain on the marble floor. Without breaking his stride, Mateo smoothly stepped around Bradley, completely bypassing my mother and Jasmine. Mateo walked directly over to where I was standing. The room fell into a deathly silence. My father, who had been quiet this entire time, slowly lowered his glass of water to the counter. Jasmine dropped her arms, her confident smirk faltering. Bradley spun around, staring at Mateo's back in absolute confusion. Mateo stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He stood perfectly straight, aligned his posture, and offered a deep, respectful bow. It was not a casual nod. It was the formal, deferential greeting of a high-level executive addressing his ultimate superior. "Is there a problem?" Madam Chairman Mateo asked, his voice clear, calm, and echoing loudly through the dead silence of the penthouse. "Security is fully locked down on all lower levels, and the corporate legal team is standing by for your instructions." The words hung in the air like a physical shockwave. "Madam Chairman." No one moved. No one breathed. The absolute reality of the situation crashed down upon my toxic family with the force of a freight train. Bradley stood frozen in the center of the room. His mouth fell slightly open, his hand still suspended in the air where he had been pointing at me moments before. He blinked rapidly, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible information. He looked at Mateo, who was still standing respectfully at attention, waiting for my command. Then Bradley looked at me, standing calmly in my casual jeans and loose blouse. Jasmine let out a soft, confused gasp, taking a step away from her husband. My mother stared at Mateo. Her fake, apologetic smile completely wiped from her face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. I looked past Mateo, my eyes locking directly onto my brother. The pathetic, arrogant smirk that had lived on his face since we were children was finally completely gone. In its place was nothing but raw, helpless panic. He had tried to steal my home, and in doing so, he had unknowingly walked straight into the jaws of a predator he did not even know existed. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute silence of the room. The trap had been sprung. The false authority they had wielded over me for my entire life was officially dead. And now I was going to tear their fraudulent world apart piece by piece. Madam Chairman Bradley repeated the words, stumbling out of his mouth as if they tasted like poison. He let out a weak, breathy laugh, desperately looking around the room to see if anyone else was in on the joke. "Chairman of what exactly, Claire?" "The local Freelancers Association. Did you register your little tax business as a corporation to sound important?" I did not smile. I did not laugh. I looked at Mateo and gave him a brief nod. Mateo stepped back seamlessly, blending into the background with the security guards, allowing me to take absolute control of the room. "I am not a bookkeeper, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a razor blade. "I never have been. I let you and our parents believe I was struggling because it was the absolute perfect camouflage. It was the most effective way to keep you all out of my bank accounts. If any of you knew I had actual wealth, you would have drained me completely dry. You would have demanded venture capital for your fake tech companies. You would have demanded luxury vacations and new cars. You would have never left me alone." My mother Brenda took a shaky step forward. Her eyes were wide, scanning my casual jeans and simple blouse as if searching for hidden diamonds. Wealth. Claire, what are you talking about? We know exactly how much you make. You do taxes for local diners and plumbers. 3 years ago, I continued ignoring her interruption completely. I founded a private equity firm in Manhattan. We specialize in acquiring distressed, high-value hospitality assets. We buy failing luxury resorts, gut their toxic management structures, and rebuild them from the ground up. I do not do taxes for local diners, Brenda. I sit on the board of directors for 12 major hotel chains across the country. Jasmine gripped the edge of the granite island, her knuckles turning stark white. Her arrogant influencer facade was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that she had spent years actively mocking a woman who could buy and sell her entire life. She looked down at the empty crystal champagne flute on the counter, suddenly realizing exactly why I had $1,000 bottle of vintage reserve sitting in my fridge. Last year I said taking slow, deliberate steps toward my brother, the Azure, filed for bankruptcy. The previous developers ran out of capital and defaulted on their massive commercial loans. So my firm stepped in. We acquired the debt. We took over the property. Bradley shook his head, holding his hands up defensively. Okay, fine. You make good money. You bought the penthouse. That does not change the fact that I just sold it. I have the signed quitclaim deed right here. Preston has the deed in his hands right now. The paperwork is done. You are not listening to me, Bradley, I said, stopping just inches away from his face. I did not just buy the penthouse. I bought the lobby. I bought the private beach. I bought the parking garage. I own the management company that employs Mateo. I own the private security firm that currently has this entire building locked down. I own the entire resort and the land it sits upon. The words hit him like physical blows. Bradley stumbled backward, bumping into Preston, who was standing as rigid as a stone statue. My brother's absolute arrogance was finally shattering, replaced by a deep, suffocating confusion. And because I bought the property under a massive corporate holding trust, I explained, turning my cold gaze to Preston to make sure he understood the absolute legal devastation heading his way. All of the individual condominium deeds were legally dissolved 12 months ago. The entire complex is currently held by a single limited liability company. It is a unified corporate asset. There are no individual units to sell anymore. My father Richard finally found his voice. His face was pale, his hands trembling at his sides. Dissolved. What do you mean, dissolved? We found the original deed in your safe. We gave it to Bradley. He signed it over legally. You found a worthless, outdated piece of paper, Richard said, my tone dripping with absolute disdain. You broke into my safe on Thanksgiving to steal what you thought was the deed to my home. You robbed your own daughter while I was cooking you a holiday meal. But that specific property title ceased to exist a year ago. The paper you stole is legally dead. It has absolutely zero standing in any court in this country. Jonathan. My corporate attorney stepped forward. He popped the heavy brass latches on his leather briefcase. The sharp clicks echoed loudly in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick stack of watermarked corporate registry documents and placed them firmly on the kitchen island, right next to the forged quitclaim deed. The transition of the deeds into the corporate trust was finalized last November. Jonathan stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, perfectly professional. Madam Chairman holds absolute sole ownership of the entity. The document your son forged is entirely fictitious. It represents a property division that has been completely erased from the county registry. Preston slowly looked down at the piece of paper in his trembling hand. He stared at the bright blue notary stamp, the sloppy forged signature, the official-looking county borders. It was all a complete illusion. He had bypassed his own corporate legal team, eager to score a cheap under-the-table deal to secure his homeowner association majority. He thought he was taking advantage of a desperate, unemployed sister and her idiot brother. Instead, he had walked directly into a massive trap. Preston's face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just been told his parachute was completely empty right after jumping out of an airplane. His breathing became shallow and rapid, his massive chest heaving under his expensive Italian suit. He slowly turned his head, his wide, panicked eyes locking onto my brother. Bradley Preston stammered, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror. If she owns the entire corporate structure, and the individual deed does not legally exist anymore. Preston took a heavy step closer to Bradley, crumpling the forged deed in his massive fist. The sleazy real estate developer was no longer thinking about building a casino. He was thinking about federal prison sentences. Bradley Preston whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, aggressive edge. "What exactly did I just buy? What did I just wire you $500,000 for?" "You bought absolutely nothing, Preston," I answered for my brother, stepping forward to ensure every single word resonated in the dead silence of the room. "You bought a ghost. You wired $500,000 to an unemployed man wearing a cheap blazer for a piece of property that literally only exists in outdated county archives." Preston turned his massive frame toward me, his face flushed with a terrifying mixture of rage and utter humiliation. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic mistake he had just made. "But I have the quitclaim deed," he growled, holding up the crumpled piece of paper as if it were a shield. "It has the official county watermark. It has a public notary seal. It is a legally binding contract." Jonathan, my senior corporate attorney, stepped up beside the granite kitchen island. He looked at Preston with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon about to amputate a limb. "A quitclaim deed only transfers the ownership interest that the seller actually possesses at the time of the signing," Mr. Preston Jonathan explained, his voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy. "If the seller owns nothing, the deed transfers nothing. And in this specific case, Bradley possessed absolutely zero legal interest in this penthouse." "But her name was on it," Preston shouted, pointing a thick finger at me. "I ran a preliminary title search through my own broker. Her name was listed as the primary owner of this unit. My name was listed as the previous owner of the individual unit." I corrected him, keeping my posture completely relaxed to contrast with his rising panic. "When I purchased the entire Azure complex out of bankruptcy, my private equity firm initiated a total corporate restructuring. We did not want to deal with a fractured homeowner association. We did not want to negotiate with individual unit owners when we decided to remodel the lobbies or upgrade the exterior aesthetics. So my firm completely dissolved the homeowner association. We collapsed every single individual condo deed into one massive unified commercial leasehold." I gestured to the sprawling penthouse around us. "This specific unit is no longer classified as private residential real estate," I continued. "It is officially registered as corporate lodging owned exclusively by Azure Holdings Limited Liability Company. I am the sole chairman of that holding company." The deed my parents stole from my safe was an obsolete piece of paper I had kept purely for my own personal records. It was legally invalidated the moment the master corporate deed was filed. My father Richard let out a loud, ragged breath. He reached out and grabbed the back of the velvet sofa to steady himself. "You mean the paper we took on Thanksgiving?" He started, his voice weak and trembling. "It was completely worthless." "It was completely worthless," Richard, I confirmed, staring directly into his pale face. "You actively committed a felony by breaking into my personal safe and stealing private documents. You risked everything you have ever worked for, just to hand your golden child a piece of trash. And then your golden child used that piece of trash to commit an even bigger felony." Bradley shook his head violently, his perfectly styled hair falling into his panicked eyes. "No. No, this is a trick. You are making this up to scare us, Claire. You cannot just erase a deed. That is not how real estate works. You cannot just magically make a property disappear." Jonathan did not waste time arguing with someone who possessed the legal comprehension of a toddler. He reached into his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound stack of official legal documents. These were not single sheets of paper printed off the internet. These were heavy watermarked corporate registry files bearing the official embossed seals of the state of Florida and the federal tax board. Jonathan placed the thick stack of documents squarely on the granite kitchen island right next to Bradley's forged quitclaim deed. He opened the heavy leather binder and flattened the first page for everyone to see. This is the master corporate deed for the Azure Resort and Spa, Jonathan stated, tapping the embossed state seal with his expensive pen. As you can clearly read, it legally supersedes and completely voids all previous residential titles associated with this physical address. This includes the penthouse unit. This document was officially finalized, certified, and filed into the state registry 12 months ago. Preston leaned over the kitchen island, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. He was a real estate developer. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He recognized the state seals, the corporate registration numbers, and the irrevocable clauses. The reality of the situation crashed over him instantly. The legal documents sitting on my counter were absolute bulletproof proof that his $500,000 transaction was entirely null and void. Preston slowly stood up straight. The forged quitclaim deed fell from his trembling hand and fluttered pathetically onto the marble floor. "I wired you the money," Preston whispered, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I bypassed my escrow company to get this done fast. I sent $500,000 directly into the routing number you gave me this morning." Bradley backed away from the kitchen island, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "It is fine, Preston. Listen to me, it is completely fine. We can just undo it. I will just transfer the money back to you right now. Just give me my phone and I will reverse the wire. We can pretend this never happened. You cannot reverse a cryptocurrency wire transfer, you absolute idiot." Preston roared, the sheer force of his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "My bank cannot pull that money back. The moment it hit your offshore account, it was completely gone. You convinced me to use an untraceable, decentralized exchange to avoid capital gains taxes on the flip." My mother Brenda let out a sharp, horrified gasp. She rushed forward, grabbing Bradley's arm. "Bradley, tell him you can get the money back. Tell him it is still there. We only spent $50,000 on the boat deposit this morning. The rest is still in your account, right? Tell him it is still there." Bradley looked at our mother with wide, terrified eyes. His arrogant facade had entirely melted away, leaving nothing but a scared little boy who had finally pushed his luck too far. "It is in the crypto exchange, Mom," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I already locked it into a staking protocol for the new tech startup. I cannot just withdraw it immediately. There is a 30-day lockup period. I do not have access to the liquid cash." The room erupted into absolute chaos. "You stole my money!" Preston screamed, lunging forward. The two massive security guards instantly stepped between Preston and my brother, placing their hands firmly on Preston's chest to push him back. "Do not touch me!" Preston yelled at the guards, his face purple with rage. "That man just robbed me of $500,000. He handed me a forged document for a building he does not own and took my capital. That is wire fraud. That is federal theft." Jonathan closed the heavy leather binder with a loud, definitive snap. "Mr. Preston is entirely correct," Jonathan said, his calm voice cutting through the screaming. "Accepting funds across state lines under false pretenses, utilizing forged legal documents, constitutes multiple severe violations of federal law. The moment the wire transfer cleared, this escalated from a simple family dispute into a major federal crime." My father sank slowly onto the velvet sofa, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, miserable groan. The $50,000 deposit they had taken from the stolen money to buy their retirement boat was now directly tying them to a massive federal investigation. They were no longer just terrible parents. They were active accomplices in a major financial crime. Jasmine, who had been standing silently near the hallway, suddenly realized the sheer gravity of what was happening. Her husband was not a misunderstood genius. He was not a rising tech entrepreneur. He was a criminal who had just defrauded a ruthless billionaire out of $500,000. I looked at Bradley, who was currently hiding behind the two security guards to protect himself from Preston's wrath. "You spent your entire life thinking you were untouchable, Bradley," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "You thought you could just take whatever you wanted because Mom and Dad would always clean up your messes. But Mom and Dad cannot clean this up. They cannot call the principal to complain. They cannot blame the other driver. You forged a federal document." I did not know, Bradley cried out, tears actually welling up in his eyes. "I did not know the deed was dissolved, Claire. I thought it was just a regular condo. I just needed the money for my business. I was going to pay you back eventually. I swear I was going to pay you back when the app launched." "You were never going to pay me back," I replied coldly. "You were going to let me pack my belongings into black garbage bags and throw me out onto the street. You were going to drink my vintage champagne and laugh about how you outsmarted your pathetic little sister." Mateo stepped forward, standing perfectly straight beside me. "Madam Chairman, the local authorities have been briefed on the situation regarding the fraudulent documents. They are currently standing by. Shall I proceed with the next phase of the security protocol?" Preston turned to me, his eyes wide with a sudden desperate realization. He realized that if the police arrived right now, his own shady under-the-table dealings would be dragged into the public spotlight. He had tried to buy stolen property to execute a hostile corporate takeover. "Listen to me, Claire," Preston started, his tone suddenly shifting from aggressive rage to desperate bargaining. "We can handle this privately. You do not need to bring the police into this. Just force him to unlock the crypto account. Force him to give me my money back and I will walk away. I will drop the hostile takeover bid for the homeowner association. I will never step foot on Azure property again." I looked at the sleazy developer who had spent the last 2 years actively trying to destroy my business empire. I smiled a cold, ruthless smile that made him instantly regret speaking. "You have absolutely no leverage here, Preston," I said softly. "You tried to buy a stolen property because you thought you could manipulate an unemployed woman. You wanted to destroy my resort. You wanted to tear this beautiful building down to build a cheap casino. I am not going to help you recover your lost funds. You made a terrible business decision. Now you get to deal with the consequences." I turned my attention back to Mateo. The final piece of the trap was set. The legal reality of their actions had completely trapped them in a corner with absolutely no way out. "Yes, Mateo," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive penthouse. "Let us proceed. Bring them up." The heavy steel cables of the private elevator began to hum deep within the walls of the building. The cab was officially making its way up from the ground floor. We had exactly 2 minutes before the local authorities stepped into my living room. That realization hit Preston like a physical blow. If the police walked through those doors and found him holding a forged county document after wiring $500,000 under the table, his entire career would be completely destroyed. His corporate board of directors would crucify him. He had intentionally bypassed standard escrow regulations to pull a fast one on me, and now he was trapped in the middle of a massive federal crime scene. Preston let out a sound that was not entirely human. It was the guttural, furious roar of a cornered animal. He completely ignored the 2 massive security guards standing just feet away. He lunged across the open space of the kitchen. He grabbed Bradley by the lapels of his cheap, poorly fitted blazer and lifted him violently off his feet, driving him backward. Bradley let out a pathetic yelp as Preston slammed him hard against the stainless steel double doors of my custom refrigerator. The heavy thud echoed through the silent penthouse. "You are going to log into your digital wallet right this exact second," Preston screamed, spit flying into my brother's face. "You are going to give me the private passkeys to that offshore crypto account, or I swear to God I will throw you off this balcony before the cops even reach this floor." Bradley gagged his hands, frantically clawing at Preston's thick, muscular wrists. He could not breathe. His flashy gold watch scraped against Preston's arm, but the massive developer did not even flinch. Bradley was a coward who had only ever fought with words and manipulated his way out of trouble. He had spent his entire life hiding behind our parents whenever his terrible decisions caught up with him. Faced with raw physical violence from a ruthless billionaire, he had just robbed Bradley, completely crumbled. "You committed wire fraud," Preston roared, shaking my brother so hard that Bradley's head bounced against the metal refrigerator door. You transferred my corporate funds across state lines into a decentralized digital ledger using a fraudulent county title. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not play games with crypto fraud, you stupid little boy. They are going to seize every single asset you have ever touched, and they are going to lock you in a cage for 20 years. I do not have the keys, Bradley choked out, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. The crypto is locked in a 30-day staking pool. I cannot touch it. The smart contract will not let me withdraw the funds early. I swear to you I cannot get it back today. Preston pressed his heavy forearm harder against Bradley's windpipe. I do not care about your smart contracts. I want my $500,000 transferred back into my holding account before that elevator door opens. Bradley gasped for air, his eyes darting frantically across the room, looking for anyone who would save him. He looked past Preston's broad shoulders and found our mother. She was standing near the granite island, clutching her designer purse to her chest. Mom, Bradley wheezed, his voice high-pitched and desperate. Mom, do something. Tell him to let me go. Call the police. Help me. For 33 years, Brenda had thrown herself in front of every single consequence Bradley had ever faced. When he failed his high school classes, she marched into the principal's office and threatened to sue the school board. When he wrecked his first car, she lied to the insurance company and said a deer ran out into the road. She had drained my grandfather's trust fund to pay off his business debts. She had actively robbed my safe on Thanksgiving to hand him the keys to my home. She was the ultimate enabler, fiercely loyal to her golden child at the expense of everyone else in the world. But standing in my penthouse, staring at a furious billionaire, and listening to the approaching hum of the elevator, Brenda did absolutely nothing. The words Federal Bureau of Investigation and wire fraud had completely broken her brain. She was frozen in sheer, absolute terror. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the crumpled, forged quitclaim deed lying discarded on the marble floor. Her mind was rapidly connecting the terrifying dots of her own complicity. She had taken the stolen deed from my locked safe. She had handed it directly to Bradley. And worst of all, she and my father had gleefully accepted a $50,000 cut of the stolen wire transfer just 2 hours ago to buy a luxury retirement boat. She was no longer just a fiercely protective mother. She was an active accessory to federal grand theft. If she stepped forward to defend Bradley now, she would be chaining herself directly to his sinking ship. If she admitted she helped him secure the paperwork, Preston would turn his violent rage onto her. The federal prosecutors would freeze her bank accounts. They would seize her suburban home. Brenda looked at her son, who was currently choking against the refrigerator. Then she took a slow, trembling step backward. She bumped into my father, who was still sitting shell-shocked and entirely useless on the velvet sofa. Brenda did not reach out to help her son. She did not yell at Preston to stop. She wrapped her arms tightly around her own stomach, physically pulling herself inward to protect her own skin. For the very first time in his entire entitled life, Bradley was completely on his own. Mom, Bradley whispered, absolute betrayal flashing in his tear-filled eyes, as he watched his mother actively back away from him. Why are you not helping me? Brenda shook her head slowly, tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. I am sorry, Bradley, she whispered, her voice trembling so badly it was barely audible over Preston's heavy breathing. I did not know you were going to commit federal fraud. I cannot go to jail. I cannot lose my house. The absolute devastation on Bradley's face was almost poetic. The woman who had taught him that he was completely untouchable was now openly abandoning him to save herself. The illusion of their perfect, loyal family was burning to the ground right in front of his eyes. Mateo snapped his fingers. The 2 massive security guards instantly stepped forward. They did not draw weapons, but they moved with terrifying synchronized efficiency. They grabbed Preston's shoulders and physically peeled the massive developer off my brother. Preston struggled for a brief second, but the guards were significantly stronger. They pushed Preston back toward the center of the room, creating a solid physical barrier between the two men. "Do not touch him again, Mr. Preston." Matteo said, his voice calm, but carrying an absolute unmistakable threat. "The authorities will handle the fraud. If you lay another hand on him while on Azure property, I will have my men detain you for physical assault." Preston straightened his expensive suit jacket, his chest heaving with exertion. He glared at Matteo and then shot a look of pure venom at me. "You set this up, Claire. You let him sell it to me just so you could trap me." I let out a soft, dark laugh. "I did not force you to bypass your corporate legal team, Preston. I did not force you to wire untraceable cryptocurrency to an unemployed man wearing a fake watch. You let your own greed trap you. You wanted to steal my property so badly that you completely blinded yourself to basic legal due diligence. You did this entirely to yourself." Bradley slid down the front of the refrigerator until he hit the floor. He sat on the expensive marble, coughing violently and holding his bruised throat. He looked up at Jasmine, who was standing near the hallway, completely silent. "Jasmine," Bradley rasped, holding a trembling hand out toward his wife. "Call your brother. He is a corporate lawyer. Tell him we need representation immediately. Tell him I have the money to pay his retainer." Jasmine looked down at her husband. She looked at the red marks forming on his neck. She looked at the crumpled fake deed on the floor. And then she looked at me, standing calmly behind the granite island, flanked by my private security and my senior legal counsel. Jasmine was an influencer who built her entire personality on associating with wealth and power. She had spent years mocking my clothes, my job, and my lifestyle. But Jasmine was also a master opportunist, and she could clearly see that the man bleeding on the floor possessed absolutely nothing of value anymore. Jasmine stared down at him, her manicured fingers tightening around the strap of her expensive designer purse. She did not reach out a hand to help him up from the cold marble floor. She did not offer a single word of comfort to the man she had sworn to love through good times and bad. Instead, her upper lip curled into a sneer of absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Call my brother," Jasmine repeated, her voice dripping with pure venom. "You want me to call a senior partner at a corporate law firm to defend a man who just committed federal wire fraud right in front of a billionaire? Do you have any idea how much his legal retainer is, Bradley? It is $200,000 just to open a preliminary file. You do not have that kind of money. You do not have any money at all." Bradley stared at her, his jaw dropping as the reality of her betrayal washed over him. "Jasmine, what are you saying? We are married. We are a team. The crypto is just locked up right now." "The crypto is completely frozen, you absolute fool," Jasmine screamed, dropping her supportive wife act entirely. She stepped back as if being near him would somehow infect her with his stupidity. "Your accounts are going to be seized by the federal government the second Preston walks out of this building and files a report. You have absolutely nothing of value. You leased the sports cars. You rented the flashy watches. You maxed out all of our shared credit cards to fund a tech startup that does not even have a working website. And now you expect me to go down with you. I am not going to a federal penitentiary because you decided to play real estate tycoon with forged paper." Jasmine physically turned her back on her husband. She stepped away from the refrigerator and walked quickly toward the granite kitchen island. Her entire demeanor completely shifted in the blink of an eye. The aggressive, entitled influencer who had threatened to have me dragged out by security just minutes ago was suddenly gone. In her place was a desperate, tearful victim putting on the performance of a lifetime. Claire, Jasmine pleaded, her voice cracking perfectly as she clasped her hands together and looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Claire, you have to listen to me. You have to tell the police that I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I had no idea he was doing this. I swear to you on my life. He told me your parents signed off on a legitimate property transfer. I did not know the deed was stolen from your safe. I did not know the building was owned by a corporate trust. He manipulated me just like he manipulated your parents." I looked at Jasmine. I did not feel an ounce of pity for the woman standing in front of me. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. "You did not know," I repeated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any warmth. That is a very interesting defense, Jasmine, because just 20 minutes ago, you were standing exactly where you are right now, holding my Waterford crystal flute and drinking my vintage reserve champagne. You told me I should be on my knees thanking you for packing my personal belongings into cheap black garbage bags. Jasmine swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the room as the security guards watched her every move. I was just saying what Bradley wanted me to say. I was trying to keep the peace. You know how angry he gets when people do not agree with his business plans. I was just playing along so he would not cause a scene. Do not insult my intelligence, I snapped, taking a slow step forward. The sudden sharpness in my voice made Jasmine flinch. You were not keeping the peace. You were actively reveling in my destruction. You loved every single second of it. You loved the idea of throwing me out onto the street so you could brag to your internet followers about your brand new ocean view. You explicitly told me that my trashy freelance bookkeeping job did not justify living in a penthouse and that I belonged in a cheap apartment near the highway. You threatened to call building security to have me forcibly removed from my own home because my presence was ruining your aesthetic. Jasmine shook her head frantically, tears actually spilling over her perfectly curled eyelashes. I did not mean any of it, Claire. I was just stressed. Please. If my name ends up on a federal police report, my brand deals will be completely canceled. My entire online career will be destroyed. You cannot let them arrest me. We are sisters. We are not sisters, I said coldly. We never have been. And your online career is already over. I raised my hand and pointed a finger up toward the vaulted ceiling of the living room. Jasmine slowly followed my gaze. Do you see those small black domes in the corners of the ceiling, Jasmine? I asked, watching the blood completely drain from her face. Those are high-definition motion-activated security cameras. They record both high-resolution video and audio directly to a secure cloud server managed by my private security firm. They captured every single insult you threw at me since you broke into my home. They captured you drinking my expensive champagne. They captured you actively cheering on my brother as he handed a forged federal document to a real estate developer. They captured you admitting that you knew the money was wired into an offshore crypto account. Jasmine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the cameras, realizing that her entire performance was completely useless. Every cruel word, every arrogant smirk, every threat she had made was permanently recorded and backed up on a corporate server. She was not going to be able to talk her way out of this. She was not going to be able to play the victim. You are not an innocent bystander, I stated, delivering the final crushing blow to her fragile ego. You are an active co-conspirator in a major financial crime. And when I hand that security footage over to the federal prosecutors, they are going to freeze your bank accounts right alongside his. Jasmine let out a low, breathless sob. She slumped against the granite counter, burying her face in her hands. Her perfect influencer life built entirely on lies, fake wealth, and the constant belittling of others had just crashed into a solid brick wall of reality. Before anyone else could speak, a new sound cut through the tense, heavy silence of the penthouse. It started as a faint, distant wail, barely audible over the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the beach far below. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, sharper, and utterly unmistakable. It was the high-pitched, piercing scream of multiple police sirens tearing down the coastal highway, heading directly toward the main gates of the luxury complex. Bradley scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with absolute primal panic. He rushed toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing his hands against the thick, soundproof glass as he looked down at the street, hundreds of feet below. No. Bradley whispered, his breath fogging the glass. No, it is too fast. They cannot be here already. We still have time. Preston has not even left the building to file a report yet. How do they know? My mother let out a terrified shriek, completely abandoning any remaining shred of dignity. She grabbed my father's arm and began shaking him violently. Richard, do something. They are coming for us. You have to call a lawyer. You have to fix this." My father did not move. He just stared blankly at the marble floor, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic ruin his family had just brought upon themselves. I turned my head and looked calmly at my general manager. Matteo adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket, his expression perfectly stoic and professional. He did not look at my panicked brother or my sobbing mother. He addressed me directly. "I did not wait for your verbal instruction to contact the authorities." Madam Chairman Matteo stated clearly, his voice carrying easily over the rising frantic sound of the sirens outside. The moment Mr. David informed me of the situation regarding the forged corporate documents, I contacted the Miami Police Department directly from the downstairs lobby. They dispatched multiple units immediately. The sirens you are hearing are currently pulling into our front driveway. The building is entirely locked down, and my security team is escorting the officers to the VIP elevator right now. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Bradley stared at the thick forensic audit report I had just thrown onto the glass coffee table. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a cornered animal who had just realized the trap had snapped shut. Jasmine leaned over her perfectly manicured nails, trembling violently as she picked up the top sheet of the dossier. Her eyes darted back and forth across the highlighted bank statements, the fake corporate LLC registrations, and the undeniable paper trail of federal wire fraud. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the devastating reality of the situation, her luxurious lifestyle, the designer clothes she was currently wearing. This multi-million-dollar beachfront rental. Everything was funded by money Bradley had embezzled from his clients, and most disgustingly from my parents' retirement estate. "Bradley, what is this?" Jasmine's voice was sharp, the syrupy sweetness she usually directed at him completely gone. "What does she mean by offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands?" Bradley swallowed hard, tugging nervously at the collar of his expensive linen shirt. "Jasmine, do not listen to her. It is just manipulated data. She is jealous. She has always been jealous of our success and our wealth." "Manipulated data," I challenged, crossing my arms and stepping closer to the glass table. "I have the exact routing numbers, Bradley. I have the digital footprints of the signatures you forged on my parents' investment accounts. The banks have already been notified. The accounts are completely frozen." Jasmine dropped the papers as if they had physically burned her fingers. She took 2 large steps away from her husband, physically distancing herself from the sinking ship. The pristine, arrogant facade she had maintained all afternoon was cracking wide open, revealing the opportunistic survivor underneath. "You told me you were a venture capitalist," she shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the high vaulted ceilings of the beach house. "You told me your startup investments were paying off. You bought me that diamond tennis bracelet last week with stolen money. You bought my silence and my lifestyle with stolen funds." "Keep your voice down," Bradley hissed, glancing frantically toward the open balcony doors as if the wealthy neighbors could hear her confession. "You are overreacting. I can fix this. I just need time to move some assets around and clear the ledgers." "Overreacting?" Jasmine practically spat the word, her beautiful face twisting in profound disgust. "This is a federal crime, Bradley. This is grand larceny and wire fraud. This is prison. Do you understand me? Federal prison." Without a single second of hesitation, Jasmine pivoted. She turned her back entirely on the man she had sworn to love and cherish, and she faced me. Her expression instantly morphed from rage to desperate, calculating pleading. She clasped her hands together, tears welling up in her eyes with a practiced precision that would have been impressive if it were not so utterly pathetic. "Claire, you have to believe me," Jasmine begged, her voice trembling with manufactured innocence. "I had absolutely no idea about any of this. He lied to me just like he lied to you and your parents. He told me his tech startups were going public and yielding massive dividends. He handled all the finances for our household. I am a victim in all of this too. You cannot blame me for trusting my own husband." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. The sheer audacity of her rapid pivot was staggering. 10 minutes ago, she was mocking my clothes, sneering at my career, and parading her stolen wealth in my face like a crown she had rightfully earned. Now, faced with the terrifying consequences of her greed, she was throwing her husband to the wolves and begging for my solidarity. A victim? I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. That is a very interesting word choice, Jasmine. Victims usually do not sign joint tax returns declaring fabricated income from shell companies. Victims do not routinely authorize the transfer of hundreds of thousands of dollars between dummy corporate accounts to avoid IRS detection. Her face went chalk white. The fake tears stopped instantly, replaced by genuine, unadulterated fear. I just signed where he told me to sign, she stammered, her hands dropping uselessly to her sides. I do not read those complicated financial documents. I am not good with numbers. You know that, Claire. I am a creative spirit. I do not understand financial jargon or tax law. No, you are not good with numbers. I agreed, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm that commanded the entire room. Which is probably why you thought it was a good idea to insult my profession earlier today. Do you remember what you said to me when I walked through that front door, Jasmine? You looked me up and down with absolute disdain and called my career a trashy bookkeeping job. You said I was wasting my miserable life counting other people's pennies in a gray cubicle while you were out living the dream. Jasmine swallowed hard, taking a step backward as the realization of her own catastrophic arrogance finally caught up with her. She shook her head slightly, unable to form a coherent defense. Well, it turns out that trashy bookkeeping job was exactly what I needed. I continued, closing the distance between us until I was looking directly into her terrified, wide eyes. That trashy job gave me the exact forensic accounting skills required to dismantle your entire fraudulent life piece by piece. I did not just count pennies, Jasmine. I traced every single wire transfer over the last 3 years. I tracked the complex routing numbers from Bradley's fake consulting firm straight into your personal checking account. I picked up the heavy dossier from the table and flipped it open, reading the meticulously documented evidence aloud to ensure she understood exactly how trapped she was. August 14th, $40,000 wired directly to a luxury boutique in Paris for your autumn wardrobe. September 2nd, a $100,000 down payment on your exclusive yacht club membership. November 18th, the exact amount missing from my mother's medical fund transferred directly to the dealership for your new Tesla lease. I know exactly how much of my parents' stolen retirement money went toward your designer lifestyle, your lavish European vacations, and the down payment on this very beach house. Jasmine began to shake uncontrollably. The reality of the overwhelming evidence was crushing her. Claire, please, she sobbed, abandoning any remaining pretense of dignity. I will give it all back. I swear to you. I will sell the cars, the jewelry, the designer bags, everything. I will divorce him today. I will testify against him in federal court. I will tell the authorities whatever they want to hear to lock him away. Just please do not give those files to the police. Do not let them take me down with him. My family will completely disown me. My reputation in the city will be ruined forever. Are you out of your mind? Bradley yelled, finally breaking out of his paralyzed state. He lunged toward his wife, his face contorted with deep betrayal and fury. You are going to turn on me that fast? After everything I bought you, after the incredible life I gave you, you knew exactly where that money was coming from, Jasmine. You loved spending it. You never once asked questions when I handed you the black credit cards to go shopping with your friends. Jasmine whirled around to face him, her features twisted with pure, vicious survival instinct. You bought me things with stolen money, you absolute idiot. You made me an unwitting accessory to grand larceny. I am not going to a federal penitentiary because you wanted to play pretend billionaire to impress your wealthy country club friends. You ruined my life. You are on your own, Bradley. You are both going down, I stated firmly, cutting through their vicious bickering and bringing the focus back to the reality of their destruction. Ignorance is not a defense against the IRS, Jasmine, and spending stolen funds is a federal crime whether you bothered to read the tax returns you signed or not. You loved the lifestyle. You loved looking down your nose at me, mocking my career and flaunting the wealth you thought made you superior. You built your entire identity, your entire social standing on money that never belonged to you, money that belonged to my sick, hardworking parents. Jasmine fell to her knees right there on the expensive hardwood floor. The pristine, untouchable golden girl was completely shattered, openly sobbing and grasping frantically at the hem of my coat, begging for a mercy she had never once shown me. "Claire, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Please just let me walk away. I will disappear. You will never have to see my face again. Please do not do this to me." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, deeply settling sense of justice. The years of enduring her endless condescension, her petty insults, and her cruel jokes vanished entirely, replaced by the undeniable factual reality of her guilt. She had built her castle on sand, and I had just summoned the tide. "Your reputation is already gone, Jasmine," I said coldly, stepping back and pulling my coat smoothly from her desperate grasp. "And as for walking away, I am afraid you are a little too late for that." At that exact moment, a sound pierced the heavy, tense silence of the beach house. It started faint, a distant wail, carrying over the sound of the ocean wind blowing through the open balcony doors. Within seconds, it grew louder, sharper, multiplying rapidly into a piercing chorus of approaching sirens. The distinct, unmistakable shriek of police cruisers and federal vehicles echoing through the quiet, exclusive coastal neighborhood. Bright red and blue lights began to reflect off the expansive glass windows, casting erratic, frantic shadows across the living room walls and illuminating the stark panic on Bradley and Jasmine's pale faces. Bradley froze, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He darted a desperate look toward the balcony, then toward the kitchen, his mind clearly calculating if he had enough time to run, if there was anywhere left in the world to hide from the mess he had created. Mateo stepped forward from the hallway shadows, smoothly blocking the only clear exit to the front door. His stance was relaxed but entirely immovable, a silent enforcer ensuring that no one was leaving this room before facing justice. He crossed his strong arms, staring down the man who had ruined so many innocent lives with absolute contempt. "I would not try it, Bradley," Mateo said, his voice smooth, steady, and carrying the heavy weight of finality. "I made a phone call before I walked up those stairs. The federal authorities have been reviewing Claire's forensic audit for the past 48 hours. They were just waiting for my signal to confirm you were both on the premises. They are coming through that door in about 10 seconds, and they are bringing warrants for both of you." The heavy oak door to the master suite burst open, and my father Richard stumbled into the living room, followed closely by my mother. The wailing of the police sirens outside had shattered their comfortable ignorance. They had spent the entire afternoon sipping champagne on the upper terrace, completely oblivious to the total collapse of their golden child's empire happening just one floor below. Richard looked wildly from the flashing red and blue lights reflecting against the glass windows to Mateo, who was standing like a stone sentinel blocking the front entrance. Then his eyes landed on Bradley, who was slumped against the sofa, and Jasmine, who was still weeping hysterically on the hardwood floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of aristocratic outrage and sudden sharp terror. "Claire, what have you done? Tell this man to move away from the door immediately. I am calling my attorneys." I did not answer him right away. Instead, I nodded at Mateo. Mateo reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek black remote, and aimed it at the massive 80-inch smart television mounted above the marble fireplace. The screen flared to life, casting a stark, cold blue light across the panicked faces of my family. A highly detailed, incredibly complex financial ledger appeared on the screen, highlighted with bright red circles and bold arrows connecting various bank routing numbers. "I want you all to look very closely at the screen," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority over the sound of the approaching sirens, "because the federal agents outside are going to be looking at this exact same document in a few minutes." Richard squinted at the screen, his face instantly draining of whatever color it had left. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she recognized the letterhead on the scanned documents. It was the crest of the private wealth management firm that had handled my grandfather's estate. "That is right, Dad," I said, taking a slow step toward him. "That is the irrevocable trust fund Grandfather set up for me before he died. The fund that was supposed to secure my future pay for my education and give me the foundation to build my life. The fund you told me was completely wiped out by bad stock market investments during the recession." The silence in the room became suffocating. Even Jasmine stopped crying for a fraction of a second, sensing the massive shift in the power dynamic. Bradley stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes, confirming everything I was about to say. "For 10 years I believed you." I continued, letting the cold fury I had harbored for a decade bleed into my words. "I believed that Grandfather's money was just gone. I worked 3 jobs during college. I served tables until 2 in the morning, waking up at 6 to attend accounting lectures. I took out crippling student loans that I am still paying off today. I lived in a damp, freezing basement apartment, eating instant noodles and wearing thrift store winter coats, because you told me the family was struggling, and there was simply nothing left to help me." My mother tried to step forward, her eyes pleading. "Claire, please, you have to understand the pressure we were under. The market was so unstable. Do not lie to me." I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. I pointed a firm finger at the glowing television screen behind me. "The dates on those wire transfers do not lie. The money did not disappear into the stock market. You drained it. You and Dad systematically liquidated every single asset in my trust fund, completely bypassing the fiduciary protections to bail Bradley out of his first massive business failure." Bradley flinched, as if he had been physically struck. Richard swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he desperately tried to maintain his authoritative posture. Bradley had started a completely fraudulent tech consulting firm, straight out of college, I explained, making sure Jasmine heard every single word of her husband's pathetic history. He overleveraged himself, took money from dangerous investors, and was about to face massive embezzlement charges. So my loving parents decided that their precious golden boy could not possibly go to prison. They drained the trust fund my grandfather explicitly left for me, the scapegoat daughter, and handed it all to Bradley to cover his tracks. "You stole my future to protect his lies," I said, my gaze locked onto Richard. "You let me drown in debt while you bought him a new luxury car the very next year to celebrate his fresh start." "Claire, it was a family emergency," Richard argued, his voice rising in desperate defensiveness. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use the same domineering tone that had silenced me when I was a teenager. "Family money belongs to the whole family. Bradley was facing absolute ruin. You were young, you were smart, and you had your whole life ahead of you to figure things out. We had to protect the family name. We did what any loving parents would do to save their son." "You did not protect the family name," I countered smoothly. "You protected your favorite child at the expense of your daughter. But here is the most interesting part of this entire tragedy, Dad." I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the remote, and clicked to the next slide on the television. A series of heavily encrypted emails and private audit logs appeared, dated 3 years ago. "I have known about this for 3 years," I revealed, watching the sheer shock wash over their faces. "When I got my promotion at the accounting firm, I finally gained the clearance and the investigative tools to quietly look into Grandfather's old accounts. I traced the money. I found the dummy corporations you used to funnel my trust fund into Bradley's failing business. I found the forged signatures you used to bypass the estate lawyer." Richard staggered backward, leaning against the kitchen island for physical support. "You knew," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You have known for 3 years, and you never said a single word." "Why would I?" I asked, tilting my head and offering a cold, calculating smile. "If I had brought it up, then you would have just denied it. You would have used your expensive corporate lawyers to bury me in litigation. You would have gaslighted me, called me crazy, and turned the entire extended family against me, just like you always did. I knew that confronting you without ultimate unbreakable leverage would be a completely useless battle." I turned my attention back to Bradley, who was sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the heavy wooden door Mateo was guarding. So I waited, I said softly. I sat back and watched Bradley build his new shiny empire. I watched him make the exact same mistakes, taking shortcuts, stealing from clients, and playing fast and loose with federal tax laws. I knew he could not help himself. I knew it was only a matter of time before his greed outpaced his intelligence. And then he made the most arrogant, catastrophic mistake of his entire life. I clicked the remote one final time. The screen shifted to display the deed to the commercial property I owned, the one Bradley had secretly used as collateral for his illegal offshore loans. He committed wire fraud using my commercial property, I declared, the satisfaction ringing clear in my voice. He tied his illegal enterprise directly to my name. And by doing that, he gave me the legal justification to tear open every single financial record attached to his name, your names, and this entire fraudulent family. I did not just audit Bradley. I audited the entire bloodline. The sirens were deafening now. The flashing lights were directly outside the front gates of the beach house. I could hear the heavy thud of car doors slamming and the sharp commands of federal agents coordinating their entry. "You trapped us," Jasmine whispered, staring at me as if I were a ghost. "You let us walk right into a trap." "You built the trap yourselves," I corrected her, never breaking eye contact with my father. "I just locked the door behind you." Richard suddenly pushed himself away from the counter, a wild, desperate look in his eyes. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are bluffing, Claire. You cannot prove I authorized those trust fund transfers. The statute of limitations on that estate has passed. You cannot touch me or your mother. The police are here for Bradley. We are walking out of this house right now." He grabbed my mother by the arm and took a step toward the hallway, but I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that stopped him dead in his tracks. "The statute of limitations might protect you from a civil lawsuit regarding the trust fund, Dad," I agreed calmly. "But it does not protect you from the IRS." I walked right up to him, invading his personal space, stripping away the last remaining shreds of his patriarchal authority. "Did you really think I would stop at the trust fund?" I asked, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. While I was digging through Bradley's fake corporate accounts, I noticed a very interesting series of quarterly dividends being paid out to a shell company registered in Delaware, a shell company that coincidentally pays the mortgage on your beautiful multi-million-dollar country estate. Richard stopped breathing. The aggressive posture completely collapsed. "That is right," I said, delivering the final devastating blow. "You have been accepting stolen money from Bradley's embezzled client funds for the last 5 years to maintain your own lavish lifestyle. You are in possession of stolen federal funds. And guess what, Dad? I bought the debt on your estate yesterday morning through a proxy holding firm. I own your house. I own your debt. And the federal agents walking up those stairs right now have a warrant for your arrest as a co-conspirator in Bradley's racketeering scheme." Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. The absolute certainty in his world, the unshakable foundation of his patriarchal dominance, was crumbling into dust right before his eyes. My mother. Brenda let out a sharp, breathless gasp and gripped the edge of the kitchen island to keep her legs from giving out completely. "You cannot possibly mean that," Brenda whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of sudden sheer panic. "Claire, that is our home. We built that house. We raised you in that house. You cannot take our home away from us. You mean the home where you constantly reminded me I was a burden?" I asked, my tone perfectly, even and devoid of any sympathy. "The home where you held holiday dinners and told the extended family I was a failure because I chose to study accounting instead of marrying into old money like Jasmine, yes, Mom. I mean that exact home." I turned my attention back to my father, stepping even closer so he could see the absolute finality in my eyes. "3 weeks ago, my private holding company acquired a massive portfolio of distressed commercial and residential debt from your local community bank," I explained, delivering the facts with lethal precision. "The very same bank where you and Mom foolishly co-signed Bradley's fraudulent business expansion loans. You put your pristine suburban estate up as collateral to secure a massive line of credit for a man who was already drowning in his own embezzlement schemes. Richard shook his head rapidly, trying to deny the mathematical reality of his situation. We only co-signed as a formality, he argued weakly. Bradley assured us the business was generating record profits. He said the loans would be paid off by the end of the fiscal quarter. Well, Bradley lied, I stated bluntly, just like he lied to his clients, just like he lied to the IRS, and just like he lied to his wife. Because his assets were officially frozen by the federal government yesterday morning, those loans immediately went into catastrophic default. The acceleration clause in your mortgage contract triggered at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. I am initiating the foreclosure on your home by Friday. You have exactly 4 days to pack your belongings and vacate the premises. Brenda let out a piercing wail, covering her face with her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked to her golden boy for salvation, but Bradley was curled up on the sofa, sweating profusely and staring blankly at the floor. He had absolutely nothing left to offer them. No money, no charm, no lies. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors of the penthouse suite were thrust open. A team of federal agents wearing tactical vests and windbreakers emblazoned with the FBI logo swarmed into the grand living room. Their heavy boots thudded against the pristine hardwood floors, instantly shattering whatever remained of the luxurious country club atmosphere my family had tried so desperately to maintain. FBI, nobody move. The lead agent commanded, his voice cutting through the room with absolute authority. He held a thick stack of warrants in his left hand and swept his gaze across the terrified faces of my family. Bradley Vance, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. 2 agents immediately grabbed Bradley by the arms, hauling him off the expensive leather sofa and slamming him face first against the glass coffee table. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the room made Brenda scream again. "Get your hands off me!" Bradley shrieked, his voice pitching high with panic as he finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. "I want a lawyer! You cannot do this to me! I know powerful people! Do you know who my father-in-law is? Preston will have your badges for this." Right on cue, Preston, Jasmine's incredibly wealthy and influential father, who had been lingering near the upper terrace stairs waiting for the champagne service, finally grasped the catastrophic reality of the situation. He stepped into the living room, took one look at the federal agents, the forensic accounting documents displayed on the television, and his son-in-law pinned to the table, and his face turned a violent shade of purple. "Do not you dare invoke my name, you pathetic criminal!" Preston roared, pointing a furious finger at Bradley. "I warned Jasmine about you from the very beginning. You are a fraud." Preston pulled a sleek smartphone from his tailored suit jacket, aggressively dialing a number. "Get my defense team on the line immediately," he barked into the receiver, completely ignoring his daughter, who was still sobbing on the floor. "I need to sever all legal and financial ties with Bradley Vance immediately. He is dead to this family." Without a single backward glance at Jasmine, Preston stormed past the federal agents and marched straight out the front door, desperately moving to protect his own empire from the radioactive fallout of Bradley's crimes. Jasmine scrambled to her feet, her perfect hair completely disheveled, her designer dress wrinkled, and her absolute humiliation on full display. She looked at the federal agents, then at her arrested husband, and finally at me. The arrogant superiority she had worn like a crown her entire life was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a woman who had just lost everything. She let out a choked sob, covered her face with her designer handbag, and sprinted out the door after her father, fleeing the scene of her complete destruction. "Take him away," the lead agent instructed. Bradley kicked and thrashed wildly as the agents dragged him toward the exit. He screamed my name, cursing me, blaming me for his failure, his face twisted in an ugly mask of pure rage and cowardice. His screams echoed down the long marble hallway until the heavy penthouse door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his voice entirely. The lead agent turned his attention to Richard and Brenda, who were huddled together near the kitchen island, looking like two frightened children. "Richard Vance and Brenda Vance," the agent said, his tone turning dangerously cold. "You are not under arrest at this exact moment, but you are officially named as co-conspirators in an ongoing federal financial investigation. Your bank accounts have been frozen. You are forbidden from leaving the state. I suggest you contact legal representation immediately. Now please vacate this property." Mateo stepped forward, gesturing smoothly toward the private elevator lobby. "This way, please." My parents moved slowly, their shoulders slumped, their faces pale and hollow. They looked aged, broken by the sheer weight of their own toxic favoritism. They had sacrificed their morality, their financial security, and their relationship with their only daughter to protect a golden child who had ultimately destroyed them. Richard stopped just before the elevator doors. He looked back at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a profound, devastating realization that he had bet everything on the wrong child and lost it all. "I have nothing to say to you, Dad," I said calmly, answering the silent plea in his eyes before he could even speak it. "Have a safe trip back to the suburbs. Enjoy the house while you still can." Mateo pressed the button. The sleek steel doors of the private elevator slid shut, sealing my parents away and removing them from my life forever. The heavy, suffocating tension that had filled the room all afternoon instantly vanished. The flashing police lights outside finally faded as the cruisers drove away, taking Bradley to a federal holding cell. The penthouse was suddenly completely quiet, filled only with the soft ambient sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline outside. I took a deep breath, feeling the clean, crisp air fill my lungs. I walked slowly across the living room, stepping over the scattered financial documents, and pushed open the massive glass doors leading out to the expansive balcony. The evening air was cool and refreshing. The sun was just beginning to set over the horizon, casting a brilliant array of orange, pink, and gold light across the water. I stood at the glass railing, looking down at the pristine stretch of private beach that I owned entirely. The view was breathtaking, but it was nothing compared to the profound, overwhelming sense of peace that washed over my entire body. Mateo stepped quietly onto the balcony behind me. He stopped by my side and held out a crystal flute filled with perfectly chilled vintage champagne. The bubbles rose rapidly to the surface, catching the golden light of the sunset. To a highly successful audit, Mateo said, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. I took the glass, feeling the cool crystal against my skin. "To taking out the trash," I replied softly. We clinked our glasses together, the delicate chime ringing out clearly into the evening air. I took a slow sip of the champagne. It tasted like absolute victory. For years I had believed that I needed their validation to be whole. I had bought into the toxic narrative that because I was family, I had to endure their disrespect, their financial abuse, and their constant draining manipulation. I had spent so much energy trying to prove my worth to people who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding me. But standing here now, looking out over an empire I had built with my own two hands, my own intelligence, and my own relentless work ethic, I finally understood the truth. Family is not defined by blood or by obligation. Family is defined by respect, by loyalty, and by mutual protection. My parents and my brother had only ever viewed me as a resource to be exploited or an obstacle to be mocked. Cutting off toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is the ultimate declaration that your peace, your sanity, and your hard-earned success are worth protecting at all costs. I had not destroyed my family today. They had destroyed themselves through their own greed and arrogance. I simply handed them the final receipt. I took another sip of champagne, letting the cool breeze wash over my face. The past was finally closed. The heavy chains of obligation were broken. I was entirely free, standing at the very top of a world I had conquered, completely untouchable, and ready to enjoy every single second of my beautifully quiet, fiercely protected life.